the recording. So the first speaker is Gitte Kragh. She's a postdoc at Aarhus University, co-founder of the Danish Citizen Science Network, and a board member at the European Citizen Science Association. She has experience from citizen science projects on 4 continents, and she's particularly interested in the interdisciplinarity required to make citizen science projects successful, and the impacts that citizen science can have on participants, science, and society. So we will now listen to Gitte.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone. It's great to see so many people here, and I can see that you also filled in a bit of a questionnaire when you registered, so we could see a lot of you are already doing stuff in citizen science. So some of what I'm going to say, you will know. Hopefully there will be a bit of new stuff for all of you. So I will be speaking about the researcher perspective. I've been involved in citizen science for a long time in various different roles. But today I'll focus on the researcher perspective. So I'll talk a bit about what citizen science actually is, just so that we all know what we're talking about. Something about motivations for citizen science. Why should we do it? Why should we get involved as researchers? Considerations before and when planning a citizen science project. And knowledge exchange and some helpful links, hopefully, and before wrapping up. So first of all, citizen science. The term is not that old, so it basically came about in 2 different ways. So the contribution of observations to science came from the Audubon Society and Rick Bonney in the 80s and 90s. And in this view, citizen science is really about citizens collecting and analyzing rain samples, for example, or bird watchers submitting sightings. Here we see participants as instruments to collect data for scientists. This is, for example, a lot of biodiversity monitoring that is happening today. The other view is from the democratization of science and comes from Alan Irwin. He wrote a book called Citizen Science in 1995. And here we're looking at democratic participatory science and science to address the needs and concerns of citizens, and citizens able to develop processes for producing reliable knowledge themselves. So in this way, it comes from the citizens as well, not only from the researchers in the other way. So in this one, participants can influence and transform science. They're not just instruments. It has a lot of other names that have been used for much longer than the term citizen science. For example, activist science or participatory action research, community-based monitoring or natural resource management. And today and over the past 10, 20 years, these 2 forms of citizen science have come together, creating what we now see as citizen science. So this means it's really broad, and coming from one or the other side, you might not think of the other way of thinking about citizen science as citizen science, but it really is. So today, there is no grand definition of citizen science. There probably never will be, because it's such a broad concept. But Oxford English Dictionary, scientific work undertaken by members of the general public, often in collaboration with or under the direction of professional scientists or scientific institutions. So the link is there between members of the public and the scientist or science being produced. That's the key thing. Again, it has a lot of different terms: public participation, scientific research, and so on and so on. So it's a really wide range of activities. It's within a really wide range of scientific fields, and it's still expanding. So a bit of an overview here of just some of the areas, some of the fields. Like ecology is huge. We use a lot of biodiversity monitoring, and that's my own background as an ecologist. But also in health, it's coming up more and more, and in patient involvement as well, cultural heritage, archaeology, quantum physics even. meteorology, sustainability, natural resource management, huge range of social science, citizen social science projects, and astronomy. And then also in other areas like SDG monitoring, though it's not a field, citizen science within all of these different fields can really provide a lot of data and monitoring data that would not otherwise be available. So moving into why we should get involved as researchers, or some of the motivations that we might have. Basically, more data. As researchers, we always love data. So more data. Achieve a temporal and geographical coverage that we would not be able to have otherwise. Access to resources that we couldn't access otherwise. And produce scientific outputs, of course. So this is really the core contribution of observations to science. Then we get into the more fluffy things like increasing awareness of scientific issues and increased scientific literacy in the public. Those are not the typical and core research focus areas usually, but are really increasingly important, as we also heard for example, the EU and funding mechanisms there. It's also about increasing inclusivity and diversity. And it's also about empowerment of the public. Then we're moving into the more democratization of science. And this is where we find this merger of the two different types of citizen science. Basically, it's fun. You should really have a lot of fun. Everybody should be having fun when they're doing citizen science. So remember that. So we can also see it, Gagan and colleagues did a research project here and identified, because motivations, a lot of us are talking about motivations of participants, but equally important is, why do scientists actually get involved? And that improvement in data, informed conservation management, informed policy, personal satisfaction. And then thinking about how that overlaps with participant motivation is really important to make these projects successful, because participants don't have the same motivations as us as researchers. For example, this is a contributory biodiversity monitoring project. So they want to spend time outdoors, just be happy, learn something new out there. And they might be doing it for somebody else, or doing it for social reasons as well. So it's really crucial to think about both types of motivations and how do they match or how don't they match. So considerations when you're doing a citizen science or considering doing a citizen science project. The key thing here is the role of you as a researcher, or potentially even a project leader. So as a researcher, you hopefully know what your role is as a researcher. But is your research question really fit for citizen science? Because citizen science, it's a methodology. Just like a lot of other methods you can choose and use it, but maybe it's not right for your research question. Another key thing is to consider how to ensure data quality and validity, because data collection here is very different to data collection that you do yourself or other researchers do. Then you're actually also taking on a bit of a theorist role, an explorer of methodology, because citizen science, it's continuously transforming and evolving, and it's fascinating. It's really great, but there is no one size fits all citizen science methodology. You can't just take, this is citizen science, I'll pop this into my project, and then everything's going to be fine and everything's going to work. Each and every citizen science project is different. And finally, you might have a role probably will have a role as a facilitator and a communicator and science communicator. This is a lot of different roles, potentially also new roles requiring new skills that you might not have. And you might go, ooh, this is way too difficult. But then have a think about it, and then identify people with complementary skills to you and ask for help. Often you can find them in the communication or outreach department, in your RPOs, or in the research libraries, or wherever else they might be. So this is really where interdisciplinarity is needed in citizen science. because as an ecologist, you need the skills that you don't get in the typical education. So natural scientists, we think about data, monitoring, possibly conservation, if that's our area. But then other researchers and other stakeholders can come in and contribute with a lot of information about, for example, motivation, communication, well-being of participants, or participatory approaches. So this collaboration is really often key to a successful citizen science project. And it's not only within RPOs, but it's actually also with volunteer and civil society organizations. Some of the really key, great examples are where the researchers from the RPOs coordinate and match up with some of the NGOs focusing, because they might already have volunteers interested in your area. So where to start? It's a method like any other scientific method. Only use it when it's appropriate. But how do you know when it is appropriate? A good place to start might be with the CEH, the Center for Ecology and Hydrology flowchart. So this publication is really to help researchers get started and realize if their research question is applicable or appropriate to citizen science. Then you need to plan. If you've worked out, yes, it is appropriate, then you need to plan it. So there's another publication here, also from the CEH, which outlines a lot of these things you really need to think about. Also consider that free labor doesn't mean without costs. So you need to think about funding. Now we just heard again, EU, there's a lot of funding for these kind of participatory approaches. So it is possible, but it needs to be considered. You need to train your volunteers probably, not only for their sake and because they want to learn something, but also to get the data, the valid data that you need. You also need to communicate with your volunteers. What are you going to do? Do you need an app? What do you need to do on social media? All these kind of things. Participants will have expectations and you really need to live up to these. Otherwise, you're not going to have very many participants for very long. So another place to look, I'm not going to go into detail, you can find it on the website, is the EXO's 10 Principles to Citizen Science. But basically, citizen science projects actively involve citizens in the scientific endeavor. So again, you have active citizens and you have science. It's crucial. The projects have a genuine science outcome and everybody benefits. It's not only science that benefits. Hopefully, citizen scientists, your volunteers can participate in multiple stages if they wish of your project. Feedback from the project is really important. This is where communication comes in. It's a research approach, as mentioned before. You need to really consider data and metadata, but also, like Ili was talking about, the open science approach and how to make it accessible for your volunteers, for example. Citizen scientists should be acknowledged. Make sure you say thank you. Programs, they should be evaluated just like any other science. And finally, taking into consideration legal and ethical issues. That's a general thing. It's getting more and more now with GDPR and everything else. So another good place to have a look is EXO's Characteristics of Citizen Science and the publication from that. Really great to actually show how diverse we are in thinking about citizen science, even within the citizen science community. Resource hubs, places to go. So national citizen science platforms and networks, there are loads of them. Have a look. They often signpost to a lot of other places and you can get a lot of information and help there. EU Citizen Science Platform, there is, I was almost going to say everything there, but there are loads of projects and resources and trainings and organizations and everything is there. A lot of things are there. Of course, scientific publications, something like Citizen Science Theory and Practice Journal. Everything is about citizen science. And then, of course, the helpful guides, lots of them, and they are also on the EU Citizen Science platform. So have a look there. Some of the, not everything on that platform is in English. Knowledge exchange, extremely important. So try to go to, for example, some of the upcoming conferences. This year, we have one hosted here at Aarhus University, Engaging Citizen Science Conference. Call for abstract is still open. You can still participate if you want. Citizen Science Association Conference is coming up in May. It's probably going to be online. The European Citizen Science Association is going to be in autumn in Berlin. And also some of all these associations, some of the regional ones, EXA, CSA, the Danish Citizen Science Network, a lot of them have working groups. These are the EXA working groups. So do join. You don't have to be a member of EXA to join the working groups. Get in there, learn from others. There are also cost actions like the Alien CSI focusing on invasive species. And finally, there is the CITSI listserv, the mailing list. So lots and lots of stuff out there. You are not alone. So please get in touch with somebody somehow. So just wrapping up, citizen science has a long history through different contexts, different fields. These main two origins of the term, the contributory and the democratization. And now the ideas are coming together. Citizen science is a methodology used across scientific disciplines in a lot of different ways. Understanding motivations of researchers and volunteers is really crucial to success. There are loads of benefits for researchers when using citizen science, but there are also really challenges that you need to consider. And finally, interdisciplinarity is integral to citizen science. So use the available resources out there and knowledge exchange, get in touch. You're not alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gitte. It was very nice and practical steps on introducing citizen science and how to start as a researcher. Thank you very much. So if you have any questions for Gitte, please write them on the chat. We will have a question and answer session at the end. So now we will continue with the presentation of Mariana Vidal Merino. She's a project officer at the European Citizen Science Association. Her core expertise lies in implementing participatory and mixed method approaches for addressing complex social and environmental challenges, such as climate change. She participates in EU-funded projects on citizen science and open science, like Step Change or the ROSI project. So now we will leave the floor to Mariana.
Yes, thanks so much, Eugenia, for the introduction. Let me just share my screen and then share my presentation. Yep. Can everybody see my screen? Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Then just briefly let me. Hello, everyone. This is Mariana, and as already was said, I'm a project officer at the European Citizen Science Association, and I'm bringing you today some insights regarding citizen science from the perspective of citizens, as well as some other stakeholders. And I will try to do this by referring to a specific case study of one of the ongoing projects that I'm a part of, and hopefully contribute a little bit to the discussion about which elements are of importance when working with citizens in research. I also prepared a small definition of citizen science, but I will skip that because I think Gitte did an extraordinary work in providing information about this. And as she already said, there is not a common agreement, nor will be about what citizen science is about, but it's more an umbrella term in which several participatory approaches are part of. And well, great minds think alike. I also highly recommend you to visit the EXA's 10 Principles of Citizen Science and EXA's Characteristics of Citizen Science if you really want to go deeper into what citizen science is about and what are the underlying elements of citizen science projects. And again, I also recommend the European Citizen Science Platform, especially interesting for the ones working in citizen science, because you will have you will find a great pool of citizen science projects, past and ongoing ones, not only for Europe, but worldwide. And for the ones that might be new to the topic or want to increase their knowledge, there is also a great pool of resources and online trainings that you can also watch on demand. They are all freely available online, so I can only encourage you to take a look. And I want to, as I said, I want to refer to citizens' involvement in citizen science project by presenting a specific case study. This case study is on energy communities in Germany. And it is a citizen science initiative that is implemented by Women in Europe for a Common Future, which is a German NGO, as part of the Step Change project in which Elsa also participates. And this citizen science initiative takes place in Germany. It is at an early stage of implementation, and it explores the use of photovoltaic systems such as solar panels to provide energy in multi-family dwellings, that is, in buildings where many families, usually tenants, live. So photovoltaic systems are widely used in Germany, but mostly in single-family buildings. And even though its use have experienced a steady increase over the past 3 decades or so, so far photovoltaic systems are only used to a small extent for multifamily dwellings. And multifamily dwellings make up for more than half of German housing stock. And that means there is a high potential for the production of solar electricity that remains untapped. And what the project research questions are is this project wants to explore the social barriers and drivers for involvement in tenant electricity models, and how can we overcome these barriers and accelerate the drivers. That is the general question, but this project also wants to zoom in the actual motivations of citizen scientists in participating in energy sharing communities. And the methods that the project uses are two. First, for quantitative data collection on energy consumption, there will be smart meters installed in the multi-family dwellings. And then for quantitative data collection, there will be living labs conducted and questionnaires with different stakeholders, including the citizens that participate in the project. And so if you look at all the research steps and the decision regarding at which stage of the research projects to involve citizen scientists needs to be taken really as early in the research process as possible. Because that decision, as Gitte was already mentioning, will really influence how you decide to shape the research process. And if we look at the different types of participants' engagement, there are usually several categorizations. I always use contributory, collaborative, or co-creative. In the case of energy communities in Germany, there are two types of involvement of citizens. The first one is contributory. Contributory means that mainly citizen scientists will participate in the collection of data. We already heard that producing data is quite interesting, and a common role of citizen scientists could be actively collecting data or passive collection as well. And then we have the second degree of involvement, that is an involvement that is called collaborative. And that is when citizen scientists, besides participating in data collection, also get the opportunity to get involved in other steps of the research project, such as developing methods and materials, analyzing data, or more commonly, also participating in the sharing of results and communication of research results. In the case of the project in Germany, there are two levels of engagement, because there are two sets of stakeholders, and each set of stakeholders has citizen scientists on them, but their profile is different, and that is important to take into account when planning any type of intervention. So if we look at the contributory level of engagement, we see that mostly the project expects for members of housing cooperatives and housing societies, those are the tenants living in the buildings, are expected to contribute in the collection of data, but we keep the door open for them to have an additional engagement in data analysis and sharing of results, depending on their level of excitement about the project, whether they are really curious about it, then they will have also the opportunity to have this deeper engagement. And as for the collaborative, that is a more intense engagement in the project, we expect that the citizens that will participate there will be members of energy cooperative board, supervisory members, and employees of these energy cooperatives. So this is a profile of citizen scientists that already have a ground knowledge about the thematic that the project is about. So we are foreseeing that also they will be able to contribute more and also be willing and engaged in contributed to different steps of the research process. Another important element for successful citizen participation is identifying early on in the process what citizens' motivations and expectations for participating in the research projects are. And in the case of our citizen science initiative, our case study, citizens are part of energy cooperatives and tenants. So here, the benefits that we have identified is that citizens will gain an increased knowledge about their own energy consumption in real time due to the installation of these smart meters. And that would also, in the long run, potentially lead to a reduction of future electricity costs. Secondly, they will gain insights and training will be provided to them on the topic and the work of cooperative. So they will understand better how these cooperatives work and they will increase their energy literacy. And third, it is expected that via their participation in the project, they will advance on the energy transition. So they will increase knowledge, and this knowledge and participation will ease their way to transitioning toward more sustainable ways of producing energy. And the same exercise was done for benefits for scientists and benefits for energy cooperatives. So in that sense, citizen scientists need to be treated as one of the stakeholders within the project. And for each of these stakeholders, it is always a useful exercise to do this mapping of actual added value of the project for them. A second. Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, so we have mentioned until now the importance of mapping the citizens' levels of engagement at different stages of the research project. We have also mentioned the importance of mapping the added value of participants in a given project. And the third element is that it is important to be aware of and support throughout the process the citizens' empowerment. So that is actually one of the desirable outputs of a research process that involved public. Citizen science can be empowered through an increased understanding of science and scientific processes, through opportunities to steer research towards the issue that matter to them and their communities. In this case of the project of energy communities in Germany, that's why one of our target citizens are people that are already members of cooperatives, of energy cooperatives, because we expect them to have already this interest in the thematic. And also citizens are empowered through the chance of getting involved at every step of the research project. They increase their scientific literacy. But when speaking about citizens' empowerment, we need to also speak about inclusiveness. So if we truly speak about democratizing science, then we need to also critically evaluate who is getting involved in science. So we cannot really speak about citizens' empowerment, democratizing science, if only a few can participate. So here it is important to make extra efforts in order to reach marginalized and vulnerable groups. And just to add some information to it, the EXA working group on empowerment, inclusiveness, and equity is also actively debating around this thematic. So if you are interested also in joining that thematic through the working group of EXA, you can find more information on the website. Yeah, and maybe to mention also a fourth element is motivation. I think Gitte already touched upon that. You need to motivate citizens and participants, stakeholders overall, in order to keep them engaged throughout the project. And that needs to happen before the project starts. You need to motivate them to join, and then you need to motivate them to continue engaged throughout the whole project lifetime. And I'm leaving there a publication that has a very nice summary about motivations, that is by Bigman. And just to mention some of them, citizens can be motivated to participate because they see the project as important, or they can participate because they hope for positive responses for friends, family, or workmates, or because participation brings them real benefits, such as building a reputation or making new friends, because they identify with the group, its norms, and its values, or because participation in the project gives pleasure. And usually it's more than one of those, it's a mixture of those, and it is important really to map that. And as was already said by Gitte, also to map where these commonalities between the interest of the scientists overlap with the interest of citizens. And just maybe to wrap up, slightly comment on the work of EXA. We are a membership organization that aims to encourage the growth of citizen science. Sorry. I thought somebody was speaking. Maybe I'm over time. I'm about to finish. Just to mention that we encourage the growth of the citizen science movement in Europe, but also in other continents. We are actively taking part in other networks and in discussions with other networks to do so. And we aim at enhancing public participation in the scientific process. And we do that by actively supporting citizen science through various projects, undertaking research on citizen science. And we also host several working groups that you are also invited to take a look at. These are available on our website. As Gitte also mentioned, our biannual Citizen Science Conference will be held in Berlin next year, but more information about that will be coming soon. And that's it from me. Over to you, Eugenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Very interesting presentation and very good and nice point about inclusiveness in open science in general and in citizen science in particular. So we will go now with the next speaker because we are with a little delay. So the next speaker is Elsa Poupardin. She's a professor at the Interuniversity Laboratory of Science Education and Communication at the University of Strasbourg, and she is the manager of the Master 2 in Science Communication at the university. She has a vast experience in outreach and open science and has participated in several EU-funded projects focusing on science communication, including training for scientists to develop better communication skills. So now we leave the floor to Elsa.
Hi, I'm sorry. I hope I will not be a too big disappointment because of my English first, and secondly because I choose an act of a little provocative title. My speech today will be on why your project, your citizen science project, should not be a project of science communication. So. My goal here is not to give you today some tips in order to make a good communication, because I think that's largely available on the web. But what I wanted to discuss with you is the fact that citizen science projects are also a new way to do science, but also a new way to do science communication. I mean, citizen science projects are not completely new, but they are relatively recent. They just appeared during the, oops, it beep. I hope everybody is listening.
Yes.
And it's not quite new, but it belongs to a very, very long way to think about science communication. At the beginning, during the 80s, you had something called the deficit model. The deficit model was a way to think science communication. And when you wanted to improve science literacy, you were thinking that the hostility or the ignorance about science were due mainly to the lack of information. So you only had to put some information in the school of people to improve their knowledge. And little by little, this idea has been proven false because we suddenly put a lot of money inside the European project in order to do that. I trained, for example, a lot of scientists to improve science communication, and it was very surprising, but it didn't work very well. A lot of scientists were involved in media training and tried to put more science in broadcasts, but it was a failure, more or less. And little by little, the way we thought about science communication changed. And we decided to go on increasing dialogue model. The idea was to stop to make a top-down communication and to be very paternalistic about what citizens should know and to try to make them a part of science. So I gave you these dates, but of course they are not totally strict, but you can imagine that between 1980 and 20,000, the idea was that the deficit model was enough. And after the 2000, a lot of European projects began to finance a lot of projects about dialogue between science and citizen. So all Gitte talk us about the debate, the participatory science came from this time. But you noticed, I'm sure, that during the two first presentations, one of the main goals of all the citizen science projects were always to increase science literacy, to increase the knowledge of the public. And it stayed in background on and on. So I was in 2000. In 2000, a lot of new projects began, and we passed from a deficit model to a contextual model. The idea was that in order to improve the scientific knowledge of the public, we should take into account their local knowledge, that cultural knowledge. And one way to do that was to install a dialogue, to install some new device to organize science and to create science. The contextual model was the first step, and little by little during the 2010, we arrived to a model called the PES. Oops, sorry. The public engagement with science, which recover all the citizen science. Okay. What I wanted to focus on is that a lot of money has been put inside this project because we wanted to improve scientific knowledge of the public. And that's always something to do citizen science for science, to change the way of thinking science, or it's difficult to organize citizen science projects in order to change science communication. So here I wanted just to recall you two mistakes not to be made when you launch a citizen science project. So the first mistake, which has been done quite a lot of times, is to come back to an old device. I mean, to use citizen science project in order to sell science. Science is fantastic, science is marvelous, so only in this purpose, or to legitimize some, I don't know, power perspective or some decision to justify techno-scientific decision. All this device, all these citizen science projects have been launched at one time. So it's not all citizen science project, but I wanted to recall that when you only have an objective of science communication in order to sell something or to legitimize, you will very, very soon come back to an old model, so the deficit model, an old communication model. The second mistake not to be made, in my opinion, is not to know the citizen who participate. You will have to recruit them, to train them, to motivate them, and a lot of things. And in order to do that, you will need to communicate with them. And that's one of the main, I don't know, training session of all the training session is you have to, in order to communicate with someone, you have to know him very well, or to know them very well. And most of the time, we are very, very keen to call them non-professional, non-scientific, and to stop there. Now, for 5 or 6 years now, a lot of studies have been done. And Mariana just recalls some of them. And now we know that you can classify them in a lot of different typology. You have the volunteer, whose commitment is based on giving, the enthusiast, who is distinguished by the attachment on one object in particular. But you can have some conscious person, which is motivated by social or political cause, science enthusiast. I just give you there one classification. You have several of them. But the idea is the second big lessons to be efficient and to have a science communication project which is rolling efficiency is to be very, very careful to what is your lay audience and who are the citizens who are participating to the project. And of course, as Gitte told us, you have so many different projects that you have so many different citizens. And that's, I think, the biggest difficulties in science communication in this project. And I just want to finish on the subject. The fact is that in French, a lot of times citizen science is used, but very little. Participatory science is more loved, and I don't know how it is in several European countries. It's used in European textbook, of course, but not really in the plain language, because the idea is that if you want to participate, you want to participate. You don't want to be a citizen. It's very, very seldom that you participate to this program because you want to be a rightful citizen. So that would be my 2 key points. And of course, you need absolutely scientific communication skills to be efficient and visible, because you will need to communicate, but you absolutely are not have to be only that, because if you still and stay at this level, it will not be citizen science project, but only science communication project. I just wanted to close there, I will be very short, by this link. It was an old European project I was part of 20 years ago, no, 15 years ago, and who was already on dialogue debates and how you have to train scientists in order they are able to discuss and dialogue with citizens. And I think that everything we have done at this point is still useful. So feel free to use it. That will be all for me.
Thank you very much, Elsa. And very interesting to see the history and the evolution of these participatory approaches and communication. So now I saw in the chat that you have been participants have been sharing some interesting reads. So thank you very much. And we are running out of time, but just a a brief question to the speakers. Because this is like the idea of the webinar was a practical guide to start a citizen science project or to start participating in one. So in your opinion, and I don't know, I will address this maybe to Gitte, which would be the common beginner's mistake when launching and starting a citizen science project, so that we all learn what to avoid?
I think the main thing for researchers is that they actually have not participated in other people's citizen science projects. So really, it's the best way to learn, not only to learn how to do it, but maybe also learn how not to do things. And because all of a sudden you can recognize, okay, I can use this in my project, but this is not going to work. So you get so much out of actually participating in other people's projects.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So best thing is to start participating in one project and then launching on this. So there's a question now on the chat by Miguel saying there is a lot of talk about citizen science and civil society, but so far I have not attended any single citizen science event that brings together grassroots groups, CSOs and NGOs, along with citizen science promoters and researchers. What is the arena for a true dialogue aimed at co-creating initiatives to solve real-world problems? I don't know who wants to take this. If Elsa, Mariana, Gitte, any thoughts?
I have nothing to, not a place.
I think it's a great question. And I
Yes.
think one of the things that we often struggle with, because we're all saying we should be doing a lot of things. Uta just dumped in a link to the GT20. So there are cases where this happens. This was a big one, the one Uta is referring to, but I think it often happens in smaller local settings. So have a look at the science shops at your local universities, the kitchen here at Aarhus University, but that's not really relevant for any of you guys. But think about, where can we go and who would be interested in doing these kind of things and who might know where to go.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I agree with Gitte that actually, for example, in the case of the energy communities in Germany, the case study I presented, this kind of dialogue took place, but not maybe in these type of spaces or fora. I completely agree that it would be interesting and productive also to bring these actors to these platforms and to hear their perspective directly. So I think it is necessary. But in terms of how actually the process for implementing a citizen science project takes place, normally it is like more locally. So for instance, and now these energy cooperatives have already had several meetings with their members to inform them about what the project is about, what their potential involvement could look like, and start shaping with them that. But that's not a process that has really been kind of then recorded or registered to be shown elsewhere. Would be an interesting exercise though.
Yeah, I would add in France, it's also the same problem. It can be very local on a very small subject, but as soon as it's a little bigger, the issue is not to organize the event, but is to do something with the event afterwards. I mean, if you manage to make discussions and decision, but that nothing appears after that, that's a problem, in fact, is to manage to have the right level of participating and decision after that. And that's a big issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your insights on this. So that the conclusion would be like we just have to keep on learning how to do it more participatory, more inclusive, and also it's all about epistemic justice also at the end. Okay, so thank you very much for all the speakers and all the participants for their interactions. I will just now announce another event that is happening this afternoon for those that are interested in participating. So in Grace, we are running on the final webinars that are every Tuesday at 2 p.m. And this Tuesday, we have a Making the Case for Public Engagement webinar. So there's still time to register if you want. And yeah, I hope you will enjoy it. Thank you very much, everyone. And we will put now the link also on the chat. And well, thank you very much for your participation. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Have a nice
Thanks,
day.
everyone. Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye.